like everyone seems to be slowing down that's entering the training. So I'll go ahead and get started. Um, so welcome to the monthly HMIS training webinar. This month we will be learning about our HMIS ad hoc reporting tool Looker. This will be a basic overview of Looker. So if you've been using Looker previous to this will be a refresher course. In today's training, we'll cover exactly what Looker is, how to think like Looker in order to get the most out of its capabilities, when it's best to use Looker versus a canned report, Looker's interface, meaning the dashboard you'll see when you open Looker, there's models which determine what kind of data you can explore, how to export the looks you create, and finally we'll cover advanced topics such as creating custom dimensions, table calculations, and visualizations. The advanced topics require some foundational knowledge in order to make the most of them, but once you've worked with Looker on the basics we're covering here today, you'll be able to use the advanced functionality to customize your reports even more. If you have any questions along the way about general Looker functionality or topics we're discussing, please enter them into the chat box and I will periodically stop to make sure that we answer them. If you have any questions about a specific Looker report you've created or something else related to your agency, please submit a help desk ticket to the HMIS help desk and we will assist you. Now we'll get started on discussing exactly what Looker is. I want to clarify some terms before starting the presentation. Looker, Explore tab, and Data Analysis tab, and Data Analysis tool. Looker is the name of the company that created and manages the tool we'll be working with today. You'll see Explore or Data Analysis tab in many of 211 OC's HMIS materials, such as knowledge base articles. The Explore tab is used to create reports using Looker, and the Data Analysis tab is used to access saved reports that we've created using Looker, either by you or by the OC HMIS staff. And finally, you'll see the data analysis tool in materials created by BitFocus, the vendor of our HMIS. However you refer to it, Looker is a tool for exploring and explaining your HMIS data. Each piece of data you put into HMIS, such as universal data elements like client's date of birth, gender, race, or project-specific data elements such as disability information and income information can be explored in Looker to gain insight into the clients you're serving and the services you're providing. Exploring can be thought of as a process of creating reports, and explaining can be thought of as the process of using reports to influence decision making. To get the most out of Looker, you need to understand how it works and what its limitations are. Like any reporting tool, you only get out what you put in. Looker has no way of using information that exists outside of HMIS. So it's important to understand what you've put into HMIS before starting to extract knowledge from Looker. Here we're covering a simplified look at the data analysis process. It begins with raw, unprocessed data, generally in a table format with columns and rows. After the initial analysis, you're left with information, which are descriptions of the data, usually patterns that can be seen in the data. Finally, after reviewing the information from your analysis, you're left with insight, which puts more information into practice. For more information on this framework, you can check out the article linked in this slide, which will be included in the wrap-up email you'll receive after the webinar. Let's look at an example of the data analysis process. Here we have a completely made up set of clients that have 13 identifiers, the client's project start dates, and whether or not the client receives SNAP benefits. This data was pulled from Looker after a case manager noticed towards the end of the month she tends to frequently work with clients on food assistance. Since some of these benefits disperse between the 1st and 10th of each month, there may be a pattern to our observation that can be seen in HMIS data. The case manager thought it would be a good idea to start focusing on connecting clients to CalFresh. Looking at only the table in its raw, unprocessed form, you're not really getting much out of it. This is part of the data analysis process. No analysis has been done yet. Upon creating a simple pivot table in Excel, which is functionality also available in Looker, you'll get we'll go over that particular subject later. You can see that a majority of the clients who enrolled during the month of July already have CalFresh. And those with CalFresh enrolled in the project on or before the 15th. This is interesting, but it's still just information. Insight represents the conclusion of the data analysis process. The case manager thought she noticed an uptick in food assistance needs towards the end of the month and thought perhaps the agency should focus on connecting clients with CalFresh. However, when she analyzed the data, she found that a majority of her clients already received CalFresh. By using Looker data, she was able to determine that an agency-wide focus on CalFresh applications wouldn't solve the problem. Most clients enrolling at her agency already receive CalFresh and for whatever reason still need food assistance before their next disbursement. Because the case manager's data analysis report, the agency was able to now strategize ways to best help clients with additional food assistance and resource management. In data analysis and data science, practitioners often say all analysis begins with a question. There are a number of considerations and parameters to take into account when trying to solidify the question you want to answer with HMIS. Let's look at an example scenario we'll use throughout this webinar. In this example, we've identified a funding opportunity to help serve a population of clients that have not been formally recognized as a priority for your agency yet, clients fleeing domestic violence. Your agency is not a victim service provider in that clients fleeing domestic violence don't make up the bulk of your clients. But you know you've served enough to need funding for special services for this population. Exploring our HMIS data is a great way to get information that can help bolster your grant application. Generally, you'll need to break down your question into segments of who your question concerns, what interests you about this group, and when your reporting period should be. The who part of our question here is all clients, and there's no additional demographic information to add to our exploration, such as gender, age, household composition, etc. The what part of our question is fleeing domestic violence. The what part of our question is fleeing, oh, sorry, I already went over that. The when part of our question is last year. Putting all of this together gives us a clear question to answer. How many clients flee domestic violence into our project last year? This question gives us direction for selecting fields and parameters we'll need to use in Looker to answer our question. If you're able to log into HMIS and view this information at the same time, now is the time to do so in order to follow along. If you can't log into HMIS right now, don't worry about it. You'll be able to see everything in the Zoom window, but it is helpful to follow along to be more familiar with the interface when you go in to make your own reports. Because Looker can run very slow, when you least expect it. Today's webinar will be entirely based in this presentation. Unfortunately, I will not be able to use Looker live in our examples because the possibility of you'll be sitting there watching a report load for 2 minutes is very high. We've noticed between the hours of 7:45 and 8:30 in the morning, Looker runs relatively fast. The same is true after 5 p.m. During the day when everyone is at work, traffic seems to slow Looker down. So keep this in mind when you're trying Looker for yourself and carve out some time at the very beginning or at the end of the day to practice. To get to the Explore tab, click the menu button at the top right in HMIS, then click the Reports option. Your menu selections will look a little bit different from mine since my account is a system administrator account, but you'll have the report buttons there. Finally, click the Explore tab. When you click the Explore tab, you'll see a list of models like the screenshot on the right. Each model has a link that says Open next to it, which will open the Looker report building interface with the data from the model you've selected. Models are sort of like buckets of data with different fields and functionality available in each bucket. Typically, you will only need the HMIS performance, client, project descriptor, and services model. We'll quickly go over each model before we get started in Looker. The HMIS performance model will meet most of your data analysis needs. It requires clients to have a project enrollment during the time period you specify to appear. And since most of you do not collect data about clients without an enrollment, this shouldn't be an issue. For those times when you need to analyze data on clients who may not have enrollments, the client model should be used. When you need data about service items provided, you'll use the services model. And finally, when you need data about your agency and project setup, bed inventory, or staff, use the project descriptor model. Now let's click on Open Link next to the HMIS performance. This is Looker's interface and the screen you'll use to pull data for your data analysis projects. We'll start on the left-hand side of the screen where you'll find your field pane. This pane is where you'll select fields you want to include in your data analysis project, both in the data you want to export and how to filter that data. When you get started with Looker, make sure to take some time to scroll through the different segments of fields and click on the drop-down arrows to familiarize yourself with locations of fields for easy access later. You can also search the fields using the search box or the filter pane for the dimensions or measures using the selection boxes under the search bar. We'll cover the differences between dimensions and measures in just a minute. To add a field to your report, simply click on the field pane. Moving on to the topmost section is the filter section. This is where you'll determine how to filter data you want to pull. Looker automatically applies the enrollments reporting period filter, which allows you to filter clients active in whatever time period you specify. The default is the past quarter. You can also adjust these drop downs to suit your reporting period you need and to make sure, sorry, I lost my place for a second. Give me one moment. Okay, for only the measures when using the select boxes under the search bar. We'll cover the difference between dimensions and measures in a minute. To add a field to your report, simply click on the field pane. Moving to the topmost section is the filter section, which is where you'll determine how to filter the data you want to pull. Looker automatically applies the reporting period filter, which allows you to filter clients active in whatever time period you specify. The default is the past quarter. You can also adjust these drop downs to suit your reporting period you need and make sure to keep in mind when creating data filters in Looker, you need to add 1 day to the end of your reporting period. For example, if your reporting period is January 1, 2019 to December 31, 2019, you should enter 1/1/20 as your end date in Looker. This is because Looker calculates the end of the reporting period using until before logic. So in your example, we're telling Looker to pull data on clients active until before January 1st, 2020, which comes to December 31st, 2019. You can also use any field as a filter. To do so, find the field you want to use, hover over it, and click the filter button that appears next to it. You can also create multiple criteria for the same field being used as a filter. Click the button next to the filter after you've added your first criteria to add another. Moving down to the page, we have the visualization section, which we will get to in the advanced topics of our webinar. Next, we have the data pane, which is where you will see the data you pull before you download it into Excel and start analyzing it right here in Looker. While scrolling through the field pane and click on the field section drop downs, you'll notice in each field section there are dimension fields in gray text that appear first and measure fields in gold text that appear last. Dimensions make up a bulk of your field options. Dimensions can be thought of as an attribute or characteristic used in group data such as client age or enrollment project start date. Dimensions are almost always pulled directly from HMIS. The client's unique identifier dimension pulls the identifier number you see on the client's profile under the space for their picture, and the enrollment's project start date field pulls each enrollment's project start date from the project start date field on the enrollment screen. Measures can be thought of as ways to group data from dimensions, and measures are not pulled directly from HMIS. Rather, they're a type of calculation using HMIS data. Examples of measures include count of clients and average income change. Let's go back to our example of looking at the number of clients served in the last fiscal year who have fled domestic violence situations directly into the project. We've identified who, what, and when for this question. Now we have to figure out how to pull that data from Looker. The who for our question asks, how will we identify our clients? If the raw data is to be emailed or uploaded into the cloud or otherwise shared electronically, you should use the client's unique identifier or client's personal ID. Client's unique identifier gives you the identifier number you see under the client's picture, and the client's personal ID gives you the number at the end of the URL when you're viewing the client's profile. And selecting client's personal ID also links you directly to the client's profile that you can click on from Looker. The client's personal ID is useful for reports that are meant to be used for cleaning up or identifying data quality issues. The what for our question asks, what are we interested in about our group of clients? Are we interested in whether clients fled domestic violence right before entering our project? Luckily, this is a HUD data element and is easily accessible in Looker. We will make sure to use the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence dimension. And finally, the one for our question is, what is our reporting period? We are interested in clients who have enrolled in our project in the last fiscal year, which is July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. We are not interested in clients who are active in the project during this time. We will set the enrollments reporting period filter to any time, and we will enter our date range in the project start date filter. Remember, when in Looker, we have to add an extra day to the end of our reporting period. So our project start date filter will be July 1st, 2019 to July 1st, 2020. I've noticed section of our field selection, I said entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence. This is because the fields that collect the same information can appear on multiple screens. The screens are organized into sections in the Looker field pane. And these are the most common ones that you'll be using when you start out in Looker. The fields in the client section generally pull from the profile page. The entry screen section contains HUD standard data elements that appear on the entry screen, and the entry custom section contains custom fields our COC is added to the entry screen, such as employment status, the state you were born in, and any fields that are specific to private funders. In the update and exit screen sections function it functions the same as the entry screen sections in terms of what you'll find in the HUD data standard versus custom data, but they pull from either the status update or annual assessment screen or exit screen. You can identify a field section by looking at the non-bold part of the field description once you've added it to the field pane. If you're following along, let's go to the Explore tab now and see if you can recreate this report. Try setting up the reporting period filters and adding the fields here that you see in your data pane. As you're adding these fields to the data pane, think about other types of reports you might find useful to export from Looker. You might be familiar with the program details report that you can access on the reports page. This report pulls all the client information from a certain screen for enrollments, but maybe you don't need quite so much information. Maybe there's a subset of fields you frequently work with, whether for reporting on your agency's activities or for data quality cleanup, that you can add to the custom Looker report, so you'll always have exactly what you need. Downloading this report and analyzing your reports in Excel should be an easy way to explore your data if you don't plan on exploring that particular data very often. After we look at how to analyze this data in Excel, we'll look at a few ways to put your work in upfront so Looker can make this data more accessible in the future. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll go ahead and continue. Okay, now we'll briefly go over how to export your data to Excel and some basic Excel tips. To download your report, click on the gear icon in the top right corner of your Looker screen and then click Download. When you click Download, another screen will appear with options for your download. First, you'll want to change the file format to Excel spreadsheet for the example we're working on. Then this is optional, but I find it good practice to change your results option to as displayed in data table so that your column headers match exactly what you see in the data pane. This will be especially important if you create a report that uses the same field from the entry screen and the update or exit screen. Generally, you can leave the values as formatted. This means your download will be an Excel file that knows how to differentiate between a text field from a date field, from a currency field. Finally, you'll want to change your limit to all results to make sure you see all of the data that has been captured by your filters. If you leave this as results in table, you'll only download the number of rows that appear in your preview, which is defaulted to 500. Now we'll briefly cover some Excel tips for analyzing your HMIS data. These tips are not unique to reports exported from Looker, the Explore tab, or the Data Analysis tab. You can also do this with any canned report you've downloaded as an Excel file. And just to note, all the data you'll be seeing here today comes from the training site and has been made up. No actual client data will be shown. Once you open up your Excel file, you can apply a filter to your report using the filters to look at your clients who fled domestic violence directly into your project. To do that, click the filter button in your home ribbon, which may look slightly different than mine depending on the version of Excel you're using, and click filter from the drop-down menu that appears. After you click filter, drop-downs appear in the header cell of each column. To filter any column, click the drop-down arrow that appears next to it. For our example, we want to see how many clients fled domestic violence immediately prior to project entry. To do that, we'll click on the drop-down arrow next to the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence column. Then click Select All to clear the filter selections and click Yes to only see clients who answered yes to this question. The result of our filtering process shows us that we only have 4 clients who enrolled in the project immediately after fleeing domestic violence. Another Excel-based way to arrive at this number is to use a pivot table. To start, click on the Insert tab at the top of your screen, then click Pivot Table. There are a few different ways to organize your pivot table to show you the number of clients in your report who fled domestic violence. But in this example, I've put the entry screen currently fleeing domestic violence field in the rows section so we can see the distributions of no's, yeses, and blanks. The values are a count of the client identifiers. The Excel methods we've gone over work best for when you need to accomplish something with a specific client's records rather than get information that doesn't deal with the individuality of clients. You may want to export our example report here if you want to identify the clients who are fleeing domestic violence into your project in order to ensure they're receiving referrals to counseling or legal services. That was a pretty long time for a single question. There are easier ways to answer questions about a group of clients that are based on HUD data elements in Looker. Going back to the report we made earlier, we can move some things around to make answering our question a lot easier. This time our reporting filters are exactly the same. The enrollment reporting filter is set to any time, and the enrollment's project start date is set to the fiscal year 2019 to 2020. Remember how we learned earlier that a field can also be a filter? Now we're going to demonstrate that. In our example, we're not really concerned with clients who are not fleeing domestic violence because we need a count of clients who are fleeing domestic violence for our grant application. You might be interested in all clients' relation to this question if you wanted to look at a proportion of clients who have an attribute or experience. We'll cover that in the advanced topic section coming up. For now, we've used the client's number of clients measure, which you can find in the clients field section. When your field sections are collapsed, you can see the count of how many fields are being used from each section. Here we have one from the clients section, which is the number of clients measure. We have two from the enrollment section, which are the enrollments reporting period filter and the enrollments project start date. We have one filter from the entry screen, which is currently fleeing domestic violence field. Finally, you'll want to save your looker to be able to come back to it later and not have to redo all your work. Click the Save button at the top of the page and name your look. The look will then be accessible on the Data Analysis tab under the System Reports. This functionality is only available to users with agency admin access. Okay. Now we're going to go over the advanced looker topics of custom dimensions, custom measures, table calculations, and visualizations. It's important to note that you shouldn't feel intimidated by these topics. They seem very overwhelming at first, and you could never possibly use them effectively. But these topics just take time and patience and a curiosity to learn. If you're just starting out in Looker, there's no need to even think about using these features until you're more comfortable creating your own reports. But you should stick around to see what's possible in Looker. This webinar's recording will be available to you on our YouTube channel for future viewing, and we will be releasing a written version of this training for you to refer back to. Custom dimensions, measures, and table calculations allow you to deep dive into your HMIS data and can save you a lot of time if you need to regularly report on the same metrics. Fields are applied to the report that you're working on when you create it. In order to use a custom field on multiple reports, you'll need to copy the code for each custom field into a text or a word processing document and save it on your computer or a cloud-based service for future use. It's important to keep in mind that since custom fields are created by individual users, they are not HUD standard. They are not monitored by 211 OC and as such are not quite as reliable as built-in fields you'll find in Looker. They are powerful tools that require deep understanding of HMIS data to be used effectively. Each custom field functions are related but meet different data analysis standard needs. Custom dimensions should be used when you want to combine one or more dimensions. Remember, dimensions are essentially attributes or characteristics that make up the bulk of fields you'll find in Looker. An example of a custom dimension could be female clients entering a project from a place not meant for human habitation. This custom dimension combines client's gender dimension and the entry screen residence prior to project entry dimension to let you see a specific population. You can combine dimensions that are not in your report into a custom dimension. For example, your custom female clients entering the project from a place not meant for human habitation dimension is only the data you'll see in the data pane. The dimension will calculate based on the client's gender dimension and on the entry screen residence prior to project entry dimensions, even though they don't actually appear as columns in your report. Custom measures should be used when you want to create a metric based on dimensions. We'll revisit our example data analysis question of how many clients fled domestic violence to our agency in the past fiscal year with the custom measure that will calculate the answer for us. Like when creating custom dimensions, you create a custom measure based on the dimensions that are not present in your report. Both custom dimensions and custom measures can be used as filters in your report. Table calculations should be used when you want to calculate something based on the data you've pulled. Table calculations can only use data that exist in your report as, sorry about that, can only be use data that exist in your report as columns or select fields. The table calculations cannot be used as filters in your report. To create a custom dimension, click on the Custom Fields dropdown, Add, and Custom Dimension. As an example, we're going to create a look for female clients who are enrolled at your agency with the residents prior to project entry of a place not meant for human habitation. Custom dimensions require the use of Looker's proprietary syntax, which is somewhat similar to Excel's equation syntax. If you've created formulas in Excel, Looker's syntax will look very familiar to you, but it's not exactly the same. When you open the custom dimension panel, you'll see a place to name your custom dimension. Try to make this as descriptive as possible. Next, you'll see the drop-down menu for your dimensions formatting. Usually the default formatting will work, especially if you're outputting whole numbers or text. But if you're outputting a date or currency, you can adjust this formatting drop-down. The custom dimension expression panels where you'll create the custom dimension. This is similar to the formula bar in Excel. The process will require a lot of experimentation and reference to Looker documents such as operators and expression articles. After today's webinar, when we send the wrap-up email, that will include links to helpful materials that will assist you in getting started with custom dimensions. If you're familiar with Excel expressions, you'll be able to pick up on Looker's syntax fairly easily, but it will be a learning process. The example we're looking at here is categorizing clients based on whether or not they are female and entered the project from a place not meant for human habitation. We start off with an if expression followed by our first parentheses. Since we have multiple criteria in this expression, we need to add a second parentheses that will hold our criteria before we move on to our outputs. Start searching for your dimensions by typing a $sign followed by a curly bracket. This will bring up a list of dimensions which you can keep typing in order to narrow further. I typed gender to find the static demographics gender field and entered =0 to indicate I only want to look for records where the gender is equal to 0. This number refers to the field listed in the HMIS data analysis dictionary. Some fields in Looker require the data dictionary's field number, and some require actual text of the response option you're looking for. Unfortunately, this will require some trial and error to figure out. Looker is releasing a data dictionary function in the future, and hopefully BitFocus will make use of this. In the meantime, sorry. Sorry, I lost my place a bit. In the meantime, if you aren't getting the results you need, make sure to try both the HMIS data dictionaries field number and the response option text. If you have trouble with this, please always feel free to enter a ticket with the HMIS help desk, and we would like to help HMIS users figure out solutions to Looker problems. I typed "and" to indicate there is an additional criteria for our results to meet and repeated the process for the residents prior to project entry field. The 16 you see here is also from the HMIS data dictionary. I close the parentheses to indicate I'm done with my qualifications and ready to move on to our outputs. For this example, I've used just yes and no, but you could use any text here. I used yes first to indicate that if my criteria are met in Looker, it should output yes for that row. And no is second to indicate that the row does not meet the criteria. You can also use a code such as FPNH here, where I used yes to indicate that the row belongs to female clients entering from a place not meant for human habitation. If you were to use this custom dimension in a larger report. Using the custom dimension we just created as a field in your data pane will yield results like this. From here, you can complete the analysis in Excel like we discussed earlier and use the custom dimension filter or use it as part of a larger report. You can create custom measures by following the steps we use for creating custom dimensions by clicking on Add and selecting the custom measure from the custom field section, or you can click on the dots icon next to any field to create a custom measure based on that field and selecting the type of measure you want to create. Before creating a custom measure, however, look through the list of measures that already exist in Looker. Bitfocus has added many measures since we recorded our last Looker training videos, and chances are the measure you need already exists. If what you need doesn't exist and you're having trouble with your custom measures to do what you need, please always feel free to enter a ticket into the HMIS help desk. Our last custom field is table calculations. Since table calculations require all fields you want to calculate to be present in your report, the table calculations should be used when you want to narrow data you've already pulled. In this example, I've pulled a report using the program's full name field to show me the name of the agency and project in each row. The enrollment count measures to show the number of enrollments in each project, and the entry screen total cash income to show me the total number of income recorded at each entry for the project. You can use the table calculation to show me the average amount of income at entry by opening the table calculation module, which is the same process for the custom dimension and custom measure, by entering the calculation here. First, I'll name the calculation something descriptive. Then I'll set the formatting I need. In this case, I changed the formatting from the default to US dollars with cents. Then I've entered my calculation by dividing the number of enrollments by the total cash income in my report. When I click Save, the new column titled Average Income at Entry will appear on my report. Now we'll move on to visualizations, which are ways to show your data with plain numbers or text. Visualizations can be used for aggregate data. Here I've modified our first example question of clients entering the project directly from a domestic violence situation to show aggregate data. I did this by adding the entry screen, currently fleeing domestic violence dimension, and the count of enrollments measure into the data pane. You can now see how many enrollments answered the question by each of the response options. I've also modified the reporting tools so we would have more data to work with as we look at visualizations. In order to visualize this data properly, we need to think about what the data actually entails. We know that only adults are required to answer the question if they've ever experienced domestic violence. We would add a filter for adults only to our data to narrow it down so that only the enrollments where a question is required will appear. But we also know that only clients who answered yes to have ever experienced domestic violence are asked if they are fleeing if they are currently fleeing domestic violence. This is even an easier way to filter our data down to only see enrollments where the question applies. Let's add a filter for entry screen domestic violence is equal to yes in our data. And now we can choose a visualization. Click on the visualization dropdown in the visualization pane. In order to look at the context of our clients who said they had experienced domestic violence at some point in their lives, determine how many were fleeing domestic violence currently, we could select a pie chart which shows us the percentage of each response option. When using a pie chart, keep in mind it may be difficult for people to accurately gauge the size of the pie slices, so it's important to always keep the data labels visible in the pie chart. It's also recommended not to use pie chart if you have more than 4 categories of data to visualize. The dot in the visualization pane opens up the drop-down menu with even more visualization options. In order to see how common each answer is, we could use a pie chart or we could use a bar chart, which will rank the response options from greatest to least. Bar chart is a reasonable choice for most data analysis you'll be doing in Looker. It doesn't work for everything, of course, but when you've got categorical data, it's generally a good jumping off point. If you need to keep track of single metrics, the card visualization might work best. Here we've also added a filter to show us clients fleeing domestic violence since we're focusing on that number. There are many resources available to choose the best visualization for your data. This one is from Financial Times and is particularly thorough and covers many visualization options that are not available in Looker, but could help you in your data analysis and visualization journey in software such as Excel, Tableau, or Power BI. Each column represents a type of data such as categorical, over time, parts of whole, etc., and the visualizations that work best for it. I know this screenshot is basically impossible to read, but it shows how much different information can be packed into a graphic. We will send this link along with many other resources in our wrap-up email after this webinar. We will also post them in a knowledge base article for future reference. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat box, or if you have specific Looker questions regarding your agency, please submit a ticket to the HMIS help desk. We will be sending a wrap-up email to all of you with some resources to get you started in Looker and a survey to let us know if this webinar was helpful or not, and how we can improve future webinars. So thank you everyone for joining. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. If not, thank you for joining us today.